to introduce Dr. Shepley. My name is Janice Whitlock, and I'm the coordinator of the Talk to 12 program here, as well as the How-To series that I know some of you have attended in the nuts and bolts of translating science into practice and policy. So today we are going to hear from Dr. Shepley, who is professor in the Department of Design and Environmental Analysis and associate director of the Institute for Healthy Teachers at Cornell. She also serves on the graduate faculty of the Cornell University Department of Architecture and is a fellow in the American Institute of Architects and the American College of Healthcare. So in addition to her academic accomplishments and pedigrees, she also maintains an active, long-standing practice, consulting practice in you have a company in design research called Art for Science. So today she's here to talk about mental and behavioral health environments, fundamental considerations facility design. And just real quickly, I'll let you know that we have an ongoing series. The next talk will be March 7th, and I hope you'll join us. And I welcome all the new faces.
Right, so thank you. So this particular set of slides I've actually showed in two other kinds of venues. One time it was with some health students in PAM, and then last week I did it to a group of architects. So it's sort of interesting to use the same slide set and deal with these three very different populations and try and figure out what people know, what they want to hear. You can imagine architects aren't used to hearing about research, and the health students didn't know much about design. So it's really an opportunity for me to share the faith, this religion that we have with regard to design research. So as you know, I'm going to be talking about mental health environments, and I'm operating two machines at the same time, so you can see it there and I can see it here, and sort of still keep focused on the audience. This group of people you see right here, I was first author of the papers that were generated from this project, but what I tend to do in terms of supporting this notion of translational research is every research project I work on, I collaborate with someone in professional design practice. So that's typically architects, but sometimes interior designers, sometimes landscape architects. And that keeps me on board with where I need to be in order to make this translational. But also I spend in my summers, I work with architecture firms, so I could still continue to pretend I'm an architect and know what's going on in the real world. So those things actually change a lot in terms of what I experience. And I like to think of myself as being a conduit between people who conduct research and people who do design. So that is the gist of this approach. So why mental and behavioral health facilities? For a long time, I've always been working in healthcare design research, but I've been specializing in critical care and care for people that are especially vulnerable, intensive care units. And then several years ago, maybe 5 years ago now, I was in a meeting, and in my area, periodically we have an organization in California that gets people together to talk about what the most pressing issue is in design field, healthcare design research. And so we argue, we chat about it, and at that time, which was around 2011, 2012, I've been thinking a lot about mental and behavioral health. And I knew that there was very little out there on the topic, so I sort of coerced this group into taking this on as their next project, and wrote a white paper for them with Samir Pasha, who was not part of the study, and the white paper we tried to do is explore any kind of information that was out there that we could call informed design, or something that would inform design. We call this evidence-based design. We came up with multiple articles, so I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. So this issue of mental and behavioral health, it's come up a lot more recently because we went through a phase, there's a while when a lot of people were in these centralized residential settings. And you've probably seen photographs of older facilities where they were trying to treat people in this long-term environment. And then there was a movement to take people out of these isolated spaces and integrate them with the community. And the idea was that we'd be providing them more support in the community, they'd be close to their families, their support network. But essentially what happened is we started discharging people to these environments, but we did not follow through on this promise and provide enough support, basic facilities for people who had been sort of turned out. And some of these individuals wound up living on the street. Many of them wound up entering our correctional system. So it's been a pretty big issue. And we like this notion as design researchers of doing what we call evidence-based design. So we stole that from evidence-based medicine. And the idea is that when you make a decision or a diagnosis, you're going to incorporate the experience, you're going to incorporate actual research evidence, and then perhaps you're going to incorporate people who are going to use this space. So use it as sort of this triumvirate trying to put this together. So I was talking to a series of doctors, and I asked them what percentage of their decisions are based on actual evidence and research. These are medical people. So what do you think that percentage is? Just throw anything out there. We actually don't have a study of this. I'm just saying anecdotally what doctors have told me. 20. 20% is what I normally hear. When people hear that only 20% of what that transaction is with your physician, they're a little put off because that seems kind of a little risky as you start to move forward. But we have to continue to produce buildings and cure people, and we don't have all the evidence we need. So we stole this term. The notion of design research, we are a baby science. We don't have our own traditions and methods. We've been stealing methods from environmental psychology and sociology, throwing them together so we can actually conduct this research. And the reality is when I talk to most architects, they recently have come to know what evidence-based design might mean, but they have not been educated to embrace the concepts behind it. So based on this literature we decided we were going to focus on mental and behavioral health environments, but that became this huge potential pool of studies. So we could have included, it depends on how you define mental and behavioral health facilities. We could have included people with developmental disabilities or persons with autism, but we decided we're going to focus on the more traditional, so-called traditional areas of people with standard diagnoses such as schizophrenia or people who have eating disorders, drug rehabilitation. We're focusing on very particular groups, so we excluded this other population, although I do know a little bit about references on if anyone's ever interested. So what was the purpose of this study? We were trying to, feel free to get food and come back, I don't mind.
Okay, no, sorry.
No, it's not a problem. We wanted to identify, so you're an architect at your desk and you're getting ready to do a new project. We wanted to be able to identify design features that they should be addressing in order to make their decisions. So that was the first piece of it, but we also say, when you have an existing facility, is it a good facility or not? And this notion of being accountable for what you do as a designer is relatively new. The architects and designers are known for expressing their egos in maybe not such supportive ways, and I'm sure you've all been in buildings where you go, what were they thinking, right? I mean, it might be pretty looked at, but it doesn't function. And we're talking about healthcare. This isn't just a sort of an inconvenience. It can undermine your health outcomes. So we've been trying to promote that in a more direct way. So I said, let's figure out what the main areas of interest are in mental behavioral health facility, and then let's create a tool that organizations can use or designers can use to evaluate what they currently have to see what's working and what's not working. And we were supported by the way, because this is a new field, support in terms of grants is very scarce. It's very hard to find funding. And the AIA Academy, the Foundation for the Academy of Architecture for Health, is one of the few organizations that puts money forward, and we were lucky enough to make this happen. So initial literature review, we looked at, I think, something like 8,000 papers. We wound up with about 300. We published these papers. And from these papers, we wound up updating it, because that was 2013. We wound up updating, and we identified, like people like to do, putting things in categories. We came up with 17 categories associated with the physical environment. So the reason I throw these 4 phases up here, this is the rest of my team. They participated as part of the expert group for the focus studies later on. But the main idea is, all right, we have this list of things that keeps appearing in the literature. How relevant is this? Are these really important questions to be asking people? because we don't want to take up people's time with things that are not relevant. So we had this list of items that we wanted to know about whether they're important, and but we thought, how are we going to figure this out? So you know how you sort of, anyone remember that book, you could give a mouse a cookie? So I kind of feel like that every time. So I want to know what this tool is. You start focus back, oh, I've got to get some information about this, oh, I've got to identify experts. Oh, how am I going to identify the experts? So trying to get these experts together, we started out with 4 individuals who I had known through my own experience to be very experienced in this field. So this is sort of starting with me. So they each had at least 20 years of experience. They'd either built buildings or they had produced research. Anyhow, they were specialists in this. And we went to them and said, who are the experts? And they each gave us their list and so on and so forth. We did it using the snowball technique until we had about 20 or so people, 22 people, and primarily in North America and Australia. So you can already see the constraints of the study. I'm dealing with English-speaking countries and other parts of the world that have great needs, but that was one of the limitations of the study. And of these, we got 19 people to participate. I coerced these 4 students here into participating with me on this, either sitting in on the interviews or transcribing them or analyzing them. Just want to give them that little bit of credit. You may recognize some of their faces if you're in my college. And you can see the distribution was about half male, half female, and they were architects and researchers and clinicians and a whole variety of people. So the interviews were not long, 25, 30 minutes. We used the analysis method promoted by Ivana Lincoln and a naturalistic inquiry, which essentially is, some of you may be familiar with it. We take the transcripts and we analyze them line by line. We determine categories. We put them on note cards. We encrypt the note cards so we can work backwards and find out who said what. And then a second reviewer, an outside reviewer, takes the same set of note cards and reorganizes them. I know many of you here are seasoned in these kinds of methods, but you're talking to an architect designer who's using this as an ancillary tool for trying to get at a particular question. And eventually we came up with a pilot survey. So the pilot survey basically was a combination of the interviews and literature reviews, and we then held a focus group to do the survey and then to evaluate its effectiveness. So this gives you a list. The list in the middle were the topics that we identified. Remember I said 17 or so issues, and you see things here like deinstitutionalized and home-like environment or damage-resistant environment. And the way the criteria for inclusion was that the methods were reasonable, relationship to the topic, how frequently they're cited. We had these topics, and then when we sat down to talk to the interviewees, we raised each of these. We used this as our script, and they told us whether they thought it was appropriate for the study, and they identified other associated issues. One of the interesting things that came up is we tried to make sure we would define the terms in the same way. So, and I'll get further on that in a second. So I'm going to list these 17. So the first part of the study essentially was a set of interviews, and then we wound up generating the survey, and I'll tell you about the results of the survey. So for each of the 17, I'll give you a summation of what they talked about generally, and then a quote. So this is sort of an ethnographic approach to it. So this notion of deinstitutionalization, how do you define it? So if I were to ask you what is a home-like environment, what would you say as a group? You're seeing some suggestions here, but how would you define a home-like environment? From a physical environmental perspective, sorry.
Comfortable.
Comfortable, yeah. What else?
Cozy fabric.
So, red fabric, what does that mean? Like
Soft,
right?
Things,
Right.
wall hanging.
Yeah, control is one of the notion of choice and control is one of the things that comes up a lot. Soft lighting, right?
Add colors,
maybe personalization kinds of techniques. So, but does every person have the same concept of home life? At one point I worked on a children's psychiatric facility, and some of these kids thought that the place where they were raised was anything but home. Right? You can imagine certain things happen there. So trying to get the core of what home-like or deinstitutional might mean was something that we discussed as on these interviews. So this is a particular quote relating to this. You're dealing with a population, this is with regard to VAs, PTSD individuals. The Italian population is probably 25% literally homeless, and another 25% that are sort of homeless. Essentially, they're living in somebody's garage or somebody's basement, trying to survive in a system that is not fully supporting them. So this notion of being orderly and organized came up as well. And so, by a show of hands, who here feels they have an orderly office? They're all 3 or 4 years. Who here has an office that kind of looks like a small tornado renter? Right. So, my office, as it turns out, my mother, where she's living, would say, no way. My office is very organized because my brain is like. So I use that orderliness to bring stability to my life, but this whole notion of, there are all these kinds of studies say, how messy is your office relative to being a creative person mostly, and you get contradictory results, and depends on a lot of other things. But you've got all these different people in this space, so how do you deal with the fact that people have different needs in terms of this orderliness versus chaos, a level of complexity? So at least this one respondent said complexity and a little bit of lack of order actually make most members more comfortable because it allows them more autonomy and activity than something that's very prescriptive and orderly. So we'll get back to that term as well. This notion of maintenance came up, and simply just keeping things running in an orderly fashion, and you don't have this room is in pretty good shape, but I'm sure you guys have been in old rooms on campus where plugs are coming out of the wall and the AV doesn't work and all of that. Maybe there's a little scribbling, people have carved their names on your desk or something like that. So this notion of having good maintenance turned out to be really important to this group. And the idea behind it was that the better the quality of the environment, the more likely people were to treat it properly. So I've actually had a very similar experience, again, working in a children's psychiatric facility where originally the kids had these metal frame beds. You guys all seen those. One of the downsides of those metal frame beds is sometimes they can be taken apart and you can use pieces as a means of affecting violence. But so we had this big debate with the client, can we put in wood furniture in this space? Heavy wood furniture that can't be picked up with drone. And we went around and eventually they used the wood furniture. I didn't hear the outcome of that, but I've seen the same thing done in a correctional facility, a minimum security correctional facility, where they put in this more home-like, the softer furnishings, and people tended to act out against it less. So there's some sort of evidence that indicates that if you treat people like animals, they're going to behave in that way, or you make them feel like they're in this kind of zoo setting. So having damage-resistant furniture, you think that would be an easy thing to do, but you want it to be deinstitutional too. So this chair would not survive in a mental health facility, apart from the fact you can pick it up and throw it. It's frail in certain areas. So they want to create this furniture that can't be thrown, but can be moved, so you can have this flexibility of getting groups together different ways, and looks deinstitutional. So there's a lot of requirements out there. Furniture should reflect the mission, as some people said, and people being able to rip things apart and use them as weapons is an issue. The physical environment is often the target of patient distress. So this is something that's near and dear to my heart, access to nature. Pretty much everyone said this was an important issue, and the conjecture is maybe there are things happening with our experience, with regard to our experience in nature, that we don't even fully understand. It may be critical, but we're not completely able to understand the implications. And someone else referred to this as the next great frontier in mental health facilities. So they said avoid, it's a beautiful environment around this building, as you all know. And if you're out there all the time and you can never get to it, that may actually have a negative side to it, this frustration of inability to access it. But when you can get to it, it said it needs to be usable. Gardens should have places for sports and recreation and vegetable gardens. They should attract birds and butterflies because these are the things that make the place joyful and the kinds of features that I believe will make people better. So the role of daylight. Anyone here live in an office without a window? And do you feel that environment influences behavior? So, these things that come to us, everyone in this room says, yes, we need daylight, we need windows, but if you are trying to build a building and the people have limited budgets, one way to reduce the cost of all these things is to not have those kinds of amenities. So what we do in our field now is we try and argue that by providing things like daylight, you can have actually a positive return on investment. So we have to convince the people with the purse strings that these interventions that we all understand help humanity and might help the healing process also have a fiscal implication. So for example, if you have a patient room in a hospital, you provide enough space for a family member to be there, that means that family member is doing more supervision of the patient. That means the patient is falling less often. Falls in a hospital is a huge problem, and each person who falls at once is costing the hospital $20,000, $30,000. So it's probably more. So that's something that we try and argue in the future. This notion of having natural, all light is natural, I should say, that daylight versus electric light is pretty important. And this particular designer mentioned a good dose of daylight during the day improves sleep and enforces healthy sleep patterns. So this notion of melatonin and axis and diurnal variation is really important to us all. So the poor staff, almost every project I've worked on will be sitting around the table during the programming phase, and for those of you that aren't familiar with that, that's the time when you decide how many spaces we're going to have, what the adjacency is, how big they're going to be. So you develop this, not just a space program, but adjacency program, et cetera. And invariably, no one has enough money to make this happen, so they start going down the list. What are we going to ask from this list? And so one of the first things that happens is staff say, okay, we don't have to have this space, because if we're serving the patients, it's more important for the patients to have it. The problem is, if staff don't have the proper spaces, they can't function in a way to support the patients, and it winds up having a negative effect on the patients as well. So this notion has become notion of providing staff respite. For example, what if in a healthcare setting, you had a nap room, I'm talking about a hospital setting, you had a nap room for staff. Yeah, there's a lot of pushback against that. On the other hand, a lot of those staff go for hours, sometimes more than 12 or 18 hours without sleep. They allow docs to do it sometimes. They allow nurses to have this sort of nap time, this debriefing, this recovery time may actually help them function better. But it rarely comes up in the design of healthcare facilities. So we're trying to promote that as part of this.
Can you say, what is adjacency?
Meaning one room being next to another. For example, so it's just totally straightforward. It's like when someone laid out the plan for this building, I came in off the entrance over here. Is there a main entrance on the other side? Right. So as you're drawing up your adjacencies, you should probably try and create a reception area that enables you to monitor both entrances, and it would be like a bubble in the middle. This is reception, and here's entrance here, here's entrance here. And that creates a set of adjacency requirements. In this case, I came in the back way, and this building is so sweet in this setting, and I don't want to say disparaging things about it, but coming into that entrance, I am lost, and a lot of people are coming down from there, and so I blame the architect.
It doesn't matter where you come in, so you get lost.
Okay.
And it's also a recycled building.
Yeah.
So that I didn't know.
I remember it as a bus garage.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's one of the reasons why this might have happened. So, but in case you guys understand, I'm sure you go into space all the time, you don't know what's going on. Getting lost in space is like one of our very favorite things to do, and it's also one of the things that when people talk about terrifying experiences as children, getting lost is pretty high up on the list. Anyone here ever lost when they were a kid? All right, about half of you were. But you've been found since then, right? Reunited. So this notion of providing...
Some of us are still lost.
Right. But this notion of providing staff safety and security thought was to be very important. So they say what sometimes happens is that a staff member gets beaten up because they're going to a small private space. This works both ways, by the way, because if you have a staff member and a patient in a place that's not observed, the patient can hurt the staff, or the staff can hurt the patient. There's nobody there to monitor. So it's something that we need to avoid. So most people believe that staff respite is an important issue. No one knew exactly how to do it. But when a staff member is on stage, they're doing their thing, delivering therapy, delivering care. When they're off stage, they're behind a wall, not behind a screen, and they might be recuperating. They might be having grief counseling because your interactions, I am impressed with the people that are able to engage with these other individuals who are struggling so and sort of come out the other side and not carry that home with them, and they do it very effectively. So this topic, there are two things. I know everyone has a field here where there's something that's totally contentious and people arguing about all the time. So in this notion of mental health facility design, one of the categories is private bedroom bathrooms. So as it says here briefly, when we think about a home-like environment, we don't normally think about going and sharing a room with total strangers, right? And this issue of privacy, everyone has, and our personal space levels expand and contract depending on who we are, but people need to have that kind of private space. On the other hand, if you're a person who is potentially dangerous to yourself by providing a roommate, they might serve to do the observations that will keep something bad from happening. So how do we, so we're designers, what do we tell our clients what to do? Private rooms are not private rooms. That's why this notion of evidence-based design is so critical. We need the data. And right now, I'm pushing organizations. Let's actually see what's happening in these spaces. Or you have, and to extend beyond the case study, you have a facility that has both private rooms and shared rooms. Let's look at the frequency with which negative behaviors take place, and they keep track of that. They have these daily incident reports. They keep track of that. Let's look at that data and see if we can actually provide helpful information on this topic. So, as it says here, they had multiple situations where where roommates would alert staff if something was going wrong. And most of the bad stuff that happens in these private spaces, particularly in the restrooms. So, you see this listed twice as number 10 and 13 because it was once integrated into this notion of social interaction. Then we decided to separate it and create patient-staff interaction and patient-patient interaction. But basically, the idea was that we need spaces like this in our environments. And the whole point of mental health care is the idea that people feel isolated and alone, are overwhelmed by their own problems, so it's important for them to feel connected. And mix of seating, it sounds like, oh, that's kind of a silly little notion, Dad, but something very inexpensive you can do. And what it does is, I know someone back there mentioned choice and control, I think it was, right? That's one of the issues. By just allowing people to have the opportunity to reform their group size, pick areas to go, that's just like one little piece of your life that you can control. And you can imagine, when you're in some of these facilities, you relinquish control of almost everything that happens to you. So these small things like being able to personalize the space or being able to use furnishings that allow you to do both. So this example, I don't have any stock in the company that produces furniture, so I should go, whatever you're supposed to say to deny anything. But what they're trying to do here is they've got a furniture system that can be used at a table and can be used separately. As I look at this table, I'm wondering how easy it is to sit at that table with a pedestal in the middle and all that. But it's three different seating options within a healthcare facility, a mental health care facility. It's just so easy to be critical of one another. I try not to say too many things about architects and designers. So flexible seating arrangements are essential. People should be able to rearrange their environments. So you may think that autonomy and spontaneity is not something that's recommended in a mental health facility, but most people thought this is actually a pretty good idea. So you are able to create certain things that allow people to have their sort of normal quality of life of what they might do at home. And this particular photo, that's actually my son sitting in the back. This is a facility that he was not actually part of the group that was in this facility, but he did leave here and was going for a walk, and two of the staff zoomed in on him and thought he was going AWOL, so I had to save him from that. But on the right-hand side, you see a counter. This was what we call a porn kitchen. So what we tried to do, this was an adolescent facility, and what we tried to do is provide some something that they could do on their own that would have a semblance of what their other life was. And that allows you to spontaneously, I'd like some popcorn. You go in, you get a bag, and you stick it in the microwave. So we were trying to support that as part of that process. So here they talk about having refrigerators with fresh fruits and vegetables and ingredients so people can make some minor things, even a can of soup, and that this is actually a therapeutic activity that needs to be promoted. So here's the second, this is that same facility. Look kind of charming going the other direction, right? You've got, trees, you can see bushes, or plants rather, and the kitchen. So this room that you see right here is the nurse's station, all right? Completely enclosed, more enclosed than it would be in a correctional facility. And and this is it from the inside, and I don't know if you can tell from where you are, but we wanted this to be all glass or open to the outside. They wound up asking us to enclose it, and then they wound up taking big pieces of paper and covering up one of the windows. So you find that in a post-occupancy evaluation. So that trend towards isolating patients from caregivers has now started to transition. And why do you think the nursing staff here wanted to create this barrier? There's some legitimate reasons. Privacy and safety. They're afraid someone's going to jump over the counter. And it happens. Everyone who delivers care in these intense mental health settings, pretty much everyone experiences aggression against them over the course of their tenure at that particular location. So we tried to actually convince them to make this open, but they decided it was going to be this way. There's a correctional facility in California. It's called a third-generation facility. Has anyone ever heard of that? The idea is that we treat this correctional facility as a therapeutic environment, so people don't think there's less recidivism, so people actually gain ground as a part of the experience. And at one point, the facilities had guard stations just like that. And they decided we're going to get rid of all the guard stations. And we're going to put the guards, they don't call them that anymore, I can't remember what they call it, something less combative, and put them on the floor, and actually found the incidence of violence was down. So it's risky in some ways. It's easy for me to say, open up your nurse station, it'll be all right. I'm not on the receiving end of an upset patient, student brain, some sort of slip there. But they now, almost like the VA, for example, is trying to do almost all open stations. So it's interesting how that's transitioned. And so here someone said they'd seen nurses' stations with enclosed glass. The patients actually broke the glass with chairs, and they never rebuilt it, and then they had a better working relationship after that. So, and also big emphasis on being able to use the outdoors. And by having exercise associated with being outdoors, people sleep better. It's a big issue in mental health design. And the notion of smoking rooms. So you can see the pros and cons. If you're already having problems, and they say, and you're here now, you can't smoke anymore. If there are people who were outside of mental health settings denied their cigarettes, will come unglued, right? So, but now they have nicotine patches and other systems. So it used to be, we actually would create smoking rooms. Even when I worked designing facilities for persons with AIDS, for example, they wanted smoking rooms. We kids, we're going to deny them a smoking room. That's what a little control you have over your life. But most people think this was 60% of people thought this was an issue we could continue to include on our survey. But it was pretty low down. So we thought, we do the survey, we'll see how many people feel like this is something we should be still concerned about as we design facilities. So as it says, the trickiest thing to do to someone who is struggling is to ask them to change too many things simultaneously. And then it talks about the VA having nicotine patches to help. Also, people have arguments about cigarettes when there's not enough cigarettes to go around. And this last item, suicide resistance, the question really was, do we know everything about curtailing suicide occurrence in mental health facilities? So this room has many things. This would not survive in mental health facilities. There are places for ligature pretty much everywhere. are to create weapons. You can hang things off stuff, or you can break off pieces and use it. So this room would have difficulty. Even that brick wall, people get upset. They start chewing away at the grout between the bricks just out of frustration. So what you're trying to do is provide an environment that seems, on the other hand, the room that would be safest would be what? Like, we'd have no carpet, it would be just a concrete block all around, right? But what a terrible environment that is. So as a designer, you're continually trying to find ways of moving around this and making the environment more hospitable. However, so if you were to, can you see a sprinkler head in here?
Yeah.
Right above.
All right, so what they do, apart from the fact that this is a pipe, one of the things they do is, you have to have sprinkler heads, and they'll take a cone and put it underneath, like a metal stainless steel cone, so the water can still come down, but you can't wrap something around it. There also looks, the stainless steel is kind of contemporary, people find that more palatable. So the idea is that you don't want to make your efforts to curtail self-harm too evident, because people are going to feel all the time like they're being watched. So just to summarize it, when we went through here, the ones that are highlighted in green were things that everybody agreed on. Smoking rooms came down towards the bottom of the list. And so you don't really have to read all this except to know that this area right here was what we had from the literature review. This is what we garnered from the interviews. And then we split these things all together to create the final content for the survey. And this first phase one has limitations. As I mentioned, we were focusing on Western cultures. We didn't include families and patients, and there was a reason for that. And that was we were developing a prototype for a tool, and we didn't want to experiment on such a vulnerable population. So we used the staff as a first opportunity to make sure that what we were putting together was appropriate. And we now have, we're now engaged with the VA hospital, and they're going to allow us access to their patients, so we'll separate, we'll create this opportunity to get data from them as well. And we could have done probably 100 interviews. You never do enough, as you guys know. So phase two, as I mentioned, was the survey, and we developed this, we revised this questionnaire, we sent it out to 4 nursing organizations. This time we got a little outside of the U.S. and Australia. We wound up involving people from the UK and Europe mainland, and we had a behavioral health facility in New York that also agreed to participate in this. And there were 7, you can see here, there's outlined 70 questions. There was a demographic scale, it took about 20 minutes. And went up in Qualtrics. We had a $100 incentive to participate. We were looking at 2 things. We wanted to know how important this item was, because thinking about passing it on to patients who will be responding, and how effective it was in their facility. You might say this is important. Are you, let's say access to nature you think is important. I would say then, okay, in your facility, do patients have access to nature? So we're just trying to follow up on that. And then eventually we asked them questions about how you achieve some of these goals. And we came up with the notion to talk about bedrooms and bathrooms and open nurse stations head on. So how important, how effective, and what characteristics contribute to all of these things. We, again, trying to organize, we had these 17 categories. You needed to organize them in some way, and so we wound up saying this cluster of things is about the overall quality of the environment, and this is about specific features. And let me show you what that might mean in a very specific way here. So the third column, the long rectangles, this lists qualities. So you see they're mostly overall things about positive distraction, providing relaxation, rather than specific features, physical features that will be in the environment. There were 2 hypotheses. One was that we want to make sure that the tool as it stood was appropriate and had the right content, and we also argued that there would be a difference between how important somebody thought something was and how effectively it was implemented. So you can see we had people that were involved had a lot of experience. 98% had more than 10 years. And mostly they were psychiatric nurses, almost 60%. So without going into any of this long, boring detail, essentially what we were doing is we were looking at these various, the qualities are on the top, these various qualities, well-maintained, access to the outdoors, aesthetic, home-like, orderly, and we were also looking at features, and we were trying to see which was most important. And we also wanted to see the top, the changes that this is effective. And this is what I put in red here is all settings. So in the beginning, we were looking at both inpatient and outpatient, and then we wanted to specializing in the inpatient piece of this. So as an example, if we say something, so an architect looks at this and they say, okay, we get being well-maintained is an important thing to do. How do we actually do that? So we tried to create these subcategories. For example, clean services, well-maintained equipment. What role do these play in it? Because if you only have a certain amount of money, where are you going to put it? Our visual access, turns out that having pleasant gardens was more important than having viewing pleasant street life. And having physical access, the main thing was, can you make this environment safe, as opposed to having space for people to sit alone. So this means as an architect, okay, I'm trying to make the decision. I'll take this list of things. This is most important. I'm going to make sure I design to meet that goal. And then we looked at inpatient settings. Even though suicide resistance was considered to be an issue but not maybe critical for inclusion, this particular population thought it was critical to keep talking about it. And then we looked to see how effective things were. Some things, like here it says, most facilities are very suicide resistant, but they provided no staff respite. Right? Stuff we actually, we just needed the data for. And to focus now on the inpatient thing, inpatient segment of this, you can see that trying for suicide resistance it was really important to have anti-ligature designs for various furniture and pieces of equipment, high visibility. But they didn't think that shared bathrooms was a critical issue providing in terms of protecting people. And then these numbers change because these are ranked and the previous ones were rated. So that's why it goes from 1 to 5 in this case. So positive distraction turned out to be a big deal. People with environmental psychology background hear positive distraction thrown around a lot. Anybody want to define it for me? What does positive distraction mean? Or give me an example. Examples of a positive distraction.
Isn't that kind of like you see a bird fly out and kind of your peripheral attention?
Yep. Or the types of things they talk about tend to be nature, music, art, social interaction. And we found in healthcare now that if we provide positive distraction in our healthcare settings, people tend to stop focusing on the things that are most troubling. I mean, it's completely evident to everyone in this room that that would be the case. But we have to make the argument to people that are running these facilities to introduce these elements so that they can have these positive outcomes. So people have different, like some people love music, some people love access to nature, so it varies, but we provide a variety of these things when we're really addressing this issue. So a lot of designers now have heard this term positive distraction, again, imparted by the people in environmental psychology, and they said here that music is really important. Video games, like on the bottom of this. I just had a student come to me today, the result of her research, and she was looking at a waiting room, and she had views of a fish tank floating around, and then she also had this game you could use to play with the fish, and she thought that if people had the game, that their experience, their perceived length of time was going to be shorter if you had this engagement. It turns out just watching the fish go by reduced the experience in time. So, that's nice. But it's a master's thesis, but all this little bits of evidence. So our field, we take it all in because we have so little. We're trying to, anyone who has been thoughtful about it and has sort of decent methodology tend to incorporate their information until we have enough studies to start coming up with their conclusions. So for regard to hypothesis 1, basically the tool worked. I wound up working last week and actually to totally revamp it, but it's primarily a visual reorganization of the material to make it easier to manage. But we did get feedback on certain ways of clustering topics that we thought would be more effective. And we did find that things that were thought to be very important were not present at all. So what this tells me is generally facilities out there are not meeting these needs that have been generally identified by people as being critical. So that's something to share with the world. Sorry. I'm turning two things at the same time. So with regard to those two things about the private rooms and open nurses stations, I have to come down somehow on this. So basically I said, okay, so the people in the audience will turn to me and say, okay, you said there's controversy, but we have to build these rooms. Tell us what to do. So basically, I'm sort of like wishy-washy, and I said, well, we need to provide majority of private rooms, but let's provide semi-private rooms, or at least private rooms that can be converted to semi-private. So that's where I stand right now, because I don't want people to lose their lives because I said, okay, everybody go to the private room setting, and you don't see folks out there, observing them and being able to take care of them. Are the open nurse stations, again, it's a question of safety. Apparently, the open nurse station will work, but what I'm suggesting here is that we create some flexibility. Your population may change over time. Maybe you need the protection, or maybe you don't, depending on who you're caring for. Why are we stalemated here, not making much progress? There's very little money both in grants and in terms of support for building buildings. That children's facility that I showed you, can you give me a sense of what construction cost is per square foot for a hospital? Throw something crazy out there. So 20% came up pretty well. That was really accurate. I was surprised. What does it cost to build a hospital?
$2,000.
It's probably good. If you were going to do something that had that was highly technical with MRIs and things like that, it might go in that direction. I would say $600 per square foot, $800 per square foot is more common. So that children's facility, $85 a square foot. This is where we are in the world, $85 a square foot. So when when I finished that building, I felt proud of the process, but I knew it didn't do everything that we wanted to do. They gave us $3,000. Our entire landscape budget was $3,000. So what I did is I got a friend who lives in LA who's a landscape architect to specify a grass and wildflower mix and some topsoil and a couple of trees. And that was the first children's psychiatric facility that was built in Northern California in 50 years at the time that was done. Since then, I'm sorry to say, they have stopped serving children in those settings and they turned it into a correctional facility. So you got to buy into the journey, not the destination, because things happen that way. So also, I was discussing with some people before this whole notion of dealing with mental health. We still, as a society, even though we all know that having mental health issues is really not the choice of the individual, right? It could be organic, it could be environmental, but it's really, from the outside, people look at it as something that you are somehow responsible for. As opposed to cancer, if you run into someone on the bus and they tell you they have a cancer, you engage in this intense conversation. I was coming up to campus the other day, on Saturday, and I got on the bus, these two guys sat next to me. They were either on drugs or alcohol or suffering from I was going up to talk about mental illness, and I realized I was in a situation. I was trying to be polite and entertain them, but I had this sort of fear that we all carry with us because of this lack of control and don't understand completely what's going on. So the stigma is out there. It's difficult here. It's difficult all over the world in terms of trying to care for this population. And then, as I mentioned here, we don't have enough research to make our decisions. And all the failings of the study, sample size was too small relative to what I'd like to have done. We're just in the UK, US, Australia, and Canada, and we didn't get families involved and patients. So this is what when I sort of this is like throwing seeds out there when I present this at a conference where I think there are potential students who might be interested in taking up one of these causes. One of them is, let's find out how to these private versus shared buildings. What really works? And hopefully what really works just outside of our culture as well, to keep that in mind. this notion of open versus closed versus stations. Is there more violence in a situation where we put a barrier up as opposed to not putting a barrier up? And then certain things like noise. You guys know that noise is can be hugely distracting and irritating. I would imagine it's going to be amplified in a setting where someone feels frail. And so any of us know here, we have a bad day. If there's this loud noise, it does tend to, it keeps you from focusing, it keeps you from being able to calm yourself. Access to nature, again, trying to promote that strongly. I think we all realize the healing aspects of nature. And supporting staff, hugely important. And so just closing, the work with the VA that I'm just getting right now, and have someone who's agreed to be co-PI with me. We're going to be looking at people with post-traumatic stress disorder, both patients and staff, using the Revised tool that I've been talking about to see if we get the same sorts of results. And they're going to also try and provide some data with regard to number of negative incidents associated with open versus stations and private. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
We have like 4 minutes for questions.
We do.
So when you did the survey, when you asked the participants to explain the importance of each of the topics, isn't it not easy for them to say everything is important? So one possibility to overcome that was to give a budget with 100 points and ask them to allocate points to each of these items. I think that would get access to the of what they actually do.
And that may be a tool of use. As it turned out, there weren't statistically significant differences between how they perceived the importance of different items. But I think that is a tool that might be especially useful when we do our next iteration of interviews. And engaging that kind of
because the effectiveness measure actually has the budget incorporated into it because of the nature of the reality.
True.
And where the importance is not.
Mardelle, I was obviously very pleased to see the priority that was given to access to nature, and there are so many studies now that have verified the value of that. I wonder if an area for future research might be the perceptions of patients and their reactions to the build horticultural nature versus the natural environment like woodland, and whether those vary.
Right, and I think that comes up particularly when we're talking about treating an urban population versus a population that's grown up in a more rural environment, and what people's preferences might be. We have found sometimes I recommend using art as art images, like some that show wild wilderness. Some people highly prefer that, and some people like the very controlled environment. And there's also, across culture, in Japan, for example, because nature has to do, there's a lot of control associated with gardens, and you go to other places like China, and expressions of preference for nature tend to be less controlled. So it's an infinitely interesting topic from multiple perspectives.
How is some of this stuff going to be incorporated into the Institute for Futures and the work you do there?
Right. So mostly this work I present at conferences where architects are building buildings. So my idea is they see this and they make design decisions based on these results. So that's my main audience. In terms of the Institute for Healthy Futures, we share this common interest in wellness. So not that hotels are in the business of providing psychiatric care, but they are in the business of supporting mental health, particularly people that get into the areas of spas and things like that. So what features, for example, in a spa setting, access to nature, other positive distractions, the ability to control, to have privacy, to be able to behave spontaneously. I think these things cross over to other settings with that focus.
We're going to speak around time, so thank you.